Which of the founding fathers of cooking are you most like? And which one's credited with opening the first restaurant? If any of them. If you've ever wondered where it all started, you're going to love the culinary history in today's Carefree Cook's Code. I'm Chef Todd Moore, and this is the Carefree Cook's Code, every Tuesday live at noon Eastern. Here's our challenge. How can home cooks cook freely with creativity, confidence, and pride while ignoring recipes and still impressing themselves and others with what they cook? Well, the answer is found in becoming empowered with how cooking works, using dependable and repeatable methods of cooking that work for any ingredient, for any diet, and any desire, just like chefs do. And we'll know we've cracked it when everyone sees cooking as an exciting and rewarding way to improve their relationships, their lifestyles, and their health through better food and cooking. This is the Carefree Cook's Code. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's Tuesday at noon Eastern, daylight savings time now, but we're the Carefree Cooks. We're back together as we are every Tuesday at noon Eastern. If this shocks and surprises you, go to web cooking classes slash live and make sure you register for my alert system. I send out a broadcast before about 15 minutes before I go live all the time because you wouldn't want to miss any of it. We're the Carefree Cooks. We create our own recipes. We bring family and friends and sometimes other stragglers together when you cook like that. We learn every time we cook. We wind up creating our own cooking style because we practice pro methods and we love cooking. It's not a chore. It's something that we look forward to. So we're together today because I wanted to talk about something. You know, when I was going to my culinary school classroom on a daily basis, every time I welcomed a brand new group of students every 10 weeks or so, there was always a progression of information that I fed them very carefully. To be honest, it's something that I try to do to you, or for you, I better said, for you, not to you. I try and bring you along in a certain way so that you can build one skill on top of the other. It's really difficult with recipes to get all this random information that comes at you from 10, 15 different angles. And what I've kind of figured out is there is a progression that works in the human mind, I think. You know, if you're a certain kind of thinker, let me put it that way, if you're a certain kind of thinker, you can put these building blocks together. And of course, in culinary school, there was knife skills, then there's soup stocks and sauces, there's food safety and sanitation, all those things, all the methods that I was teaching to the students in my culinary school lab. But the class that I really tried to drive home, the one that I spent so much time preparing for, maybe the most time preparing for, because the rest of it honestly came pretty easy to me. But the one that I tried to bring the most passion in delivering is the class that I'm going to share with you today, because you can't have an appreciation for where you are. You can't have a vision for where you might be going if you don't know where you came from and who helped you get there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I've got a what am I for you today. This is where you tell me, what am I? In the comments section below. Since we're going to talk about old stuff today, here's an antique thing. All right, I'll give you that hint. It's antique. I'll give you another hint. It's probably something you would see in the dining room more than the kitchen. All right, that's another hint. You might have seen this on like Downton Abbey. Okay, there's another hint, so can't give you any more hints. Tell me what am I in the comments section below for what you think this little bit of history is used for. What am I is the game today, and I tell you the answer at the end. So, look, I know you're never going to admit it, and I would never admit it for sure, but we take food for granted. We do. We all do. Think about this. Sitting down in a restaurant, choosing what you want from a long list of items that's then cooked on demand, brought to you by a waiter, right, in a really nice environment. These are all very new concepts when it comes to the history of man. And here's the first thought I want you to chew on today, and maybe the first aha moment of the day. There's going to be a lot of them. That the very concept of a restaurant has been around barely 200 years. And unless you were aristocracy, unless you had a name or a title, you were a merchant or a vendor, someone of means, someone who had money, you're not even going to have access to somewhere that somebody else cooks food for you for money for another 80 to 100 years. So if you were an average person, within the last 100 to 150 years, you either dug up your own food or you certainly cooked your own food, because taverns and restoratives, they were way beyond your reach. Restorative. I'll tell you that in a minute. But first, we're going to go way back. Let's go way back. We're going to go way back to the Middle Ages, because from medieval times up through the 1500s, it was culinary guilds that were developed. And these guilds were put together really to dictate and monopolize on the preparation of certain foods. It was like having a union of meat chefs and a union of bakers and a union of vegetable prep cooks. But, I say union, it's not like a union today. They didn't benefit from this much at all. They were more like indentured servants, because the guilds were put together by royalty, by aristocracy, as a way to get a lot of money for all the bread that was being baked in town. It wasn't, again, not a union like you would think of today. These people were more servants than anything else. And each guild was governed by the production of what they prepared, of what they cooked. The focus was on the food. And a medieval lord, right, the owner of the castle, granted by the king, the overseer of his land grant from the king, and the people that worked that land, they paid rent to the landlord. The landlord collected your rent, as we do today. And this right here, this happens to be Lord Charles Calvert, who is the third Lord of Baltimore. Okay, it's a different place, it's a different time, it's a different guy, but it's a picture of a lord, okay? This is third Lord Baltimore. I wanted to throw it in there. It's not specific, but it goes with the story. He's a lord. So this lord, he had a large house, right? And a big kitchen staff working in the kitchen, but each person had a specific job. And, we talked about this a few weeks ago during the Carefree Cooks Code episode that I called How Many Chefs Do I Have to Be to Get Dinner Done Tonight? And during this episode, you might remember, I asked if you would be interested in a little bit of culinary history, maybe in an episode, and I got a big stream of yeses. So that's why here we are today. This is a request from you. And if you remember back to that How Many Chefs episode, I had gone to this really fancy restaurant here downtown Baltimore that operates under the classical brigade system. And I wondered to myself, how many chefs did it take to make my meal? Well, the origins of that meal really started in a medieval castle. Oh, and there is the current Lord of Baltimore in front of a castle in Scotland. Again, wrong guy, wrong time, wrong place, but I like that picture. But the facts I'm telling you are totally true, because in a medieval kitchen, duties, again, were separated by the food item to be cooked. And there was a rôtisseur, and he was responsible for all the grilling and rotisserie of meats. Strictly meats was the rôtisseur. The pâtissier was responsible for poultry, pies and tarts, and the vinaigrette was soups and sauces, things like that, stews. So do you see any contemporary words in there? Pâtissier, rôtissier, my French isn't the best, vinaigrier, Today pâtissier is a baker. He's a pastry maker. But back then, since so much poultry was baked in a pie, okay, a lot of poultry was baked in a pie, the poultry, these guys were poultry cookers first. That's the greatest protein. And they were pie makers second. Pies were more savory. The idea of a very sweet, like treating yourselves to sweets, the idea of chocolate, forget about it. The idea of sugar was very rare. So, things were much different for the pâtissier. He was a bird baker, basically, in a pie. And I'm sure you've heard of the cold sauce made of oil and vinegar that you pour all over your lettuce, right? It's a vinaigrette. This comes from the same name. It's a sauce, just like the name of the stew maker from several hundred years ago. Anyway, I'm getting into a lot of French words here, and there are a lot more to come, because while I understand that every culture and every country has their own culinary history, and I respect that. Yes, there's a whole Chinese culinary history. There's a whole Middle Eastern culinary. There's a whole Australian and UK. I understand and respect that. I know the French didn't invent everything. They were just the first to write it down. A chef said that to me early on. The French didn't invent it. They were just the first to write it down. And it's true, but I got to focus on French history since they're credited with inventing the first restaurant. And that's what I want to get to. Okay, where are we now? Oh yeah, where are we? We're back in a deep, damp, dreary castle with dozens of guild cooks. Now, out and about in Paris and throughout the major cities in France, there are places that would prepare food for you for a charge, but it was usually in charge of the room. And in the late 1600s, there were taverns. But a tavern isn't the word that you would think of today. A tavern isn't your pub. A tavern isn't a bar. A tavern was an inn. And taverns would offer sleeping rooms that came with a restorative. Something that would help you restore your health, restore your vigor, as they said. Vigor was big back then. I don't know why. You had a long journey, you arrived at the inn. So you got this restorative along with your room. Think about that for a minute. The derivation of that word, restorative. You got your restorative at the tavern, a place that had rooms, but also you got some food. But look, by the end of these 1600s, the guild members were given new political status, new legal status, and guild members were no longer owned by the aristocracy, no longer in indentured servitude of kinds. They were now for-hire professionals. They could go out on their own instead of being stuck in the castle. They were called traiteur, 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 a word today that means caterer more than chef. When I went to Paris, my buddy Pascal, the owner of the spice shop, he kept calling me traiteur. Oh, you are traiteur, more like a caterer. And traiteurs back then, they were the first caterers, because when you come out of indentured servitude, pretty much, you focus on making sophisticated meals for healthy, wealthy residents, right? For the really upper crust of society. And when I was a caterer or a traiteur about 300 years later, I called it an in-home gig. You know, I did a party at somebody's house. But since the taverns and the cabarets were still serving little more than grilled meats, stews, and poultry pies, the traiteurs saw a new opportunity. And they began to offer host tables. They got a space, they set up a table, and you paid one price to sit at this large table with other guests and eat a fixed menu meal, whatever the traiteur had prepared. It's a prix fixe. It's family dining. I used to do it in my catering company. We called it supper club. But you could eat that way, and that was, you had to pay for those. It's a little more expensive. Or you can get what we would call takeout food from guild members that weren't doing these host tables. They didn't work in a castle or for a lord anymore, and you could purchase roasted meats from the rôtisseurs right on the street or the marketplace. So these kind of farmers markets started to develop, and the street vendors. You could get your sweet or savory pies from the pâtissier. And, I kind of think of this as the way food trucks gather today. It's the same type of thing. And if in your city, if there's a food truck gathering, it's the same type of thing. These are traiteurs. These are guys that come and sell their prepared food to you. So slowly, very slowly, commercially prepared food is starting to become available to more and more people. And the earliest establishment given credit for modern format service, a modern restaurant service, opened in 1765 by a man who's always called Boulanger. But I always think that there was a confusion here, because boulanger is on the front of the store. Boulanger is a general French word in every textbook I've ever read. But when I dig more, when you read more and more about this stuff, you become a little obsessed with culinary history. I found his real name to be Mathurin Rosset de Chantoiseau. 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 And you see those words on the storefront there, right? He was a traiteur. He was a pâtissier. He offered his own restorative now in his own shop. And his restorative was a bouillon. But again, a bouillon is different than a dry cube that we think about today. This is a broth, and it's a heavy protein broth. It's got a lot of meat in it. It's got bits of egg, and he advertised it to restore your health and vigor. You have a restorative in his store that he opened for the specific purpose to do this. And, some stories report that Monsieur Boulanger's restorative was not a broth or a bouillon. It was sheep's feet in a white sauce. You'll hear this all the time, but it doesn't make as much sense for the time and for what was available then. It's much more likely that it would have been a broth, in my opinion. I'm not a culinary historian, but I've done some good reading about it. So no matter what the restorative dish, the argument goes on. Boulanger or Chantoiseau, his place was elegantly decorated. They used tablecloths. They used fine china. They began offering a list of items, other restorative dishes. Now, again, it's so much more a focus of elegance and health at this part. He was supposedly the first to bring in pasta and offer macaroni that was a restorative for your health. But here's the big thing about Boulanger or Chantoiseau. His establishment, he called himself a traiteur-restaurateur. He is a cook, a caterer who makes restoratives in his own place, but his place is in Paris, and it's noted as the first to offer multiple items on a menu in an elegant atmosphere with table service. It's the first restaurant. Chantoiseau or Boulanger started the first restaurant in Paris in 1765. But the single biggest impact, the atomic explosion that sent chefs scurrying all over Paris, was, of course, the French Revolution. Yeah, there were traiteurs, there were guildsmen, there were taverns, there were cabaret cooks, but most of the professional, quote-unquote, cooks at the time were servants to aristocracy. They got room and board and a stipend. But when the French Revolution came, his lordship was kind of out of a job, And his lordship might have been a few inches shorter at the top, as they used to like to say. So all the kitchen staff, all the servants, all these guildmen were set free, and the social structure in France started to change dramatically and quickly. I just imagine misplaced chefs wandering all over Paris. Mon Dieu, what am I going to do now? Well, they started doing what they knew best. They started cooking again. And that's when the number of restaurants, no longer storing health and vigor restoratives, but practicing their craft, and it exploded. In Paris, throughout Europe, as governments changed, as populations grew, and commercially prepared food became more easily available to the average person. And in the early 19th century, the traiteurs, the restaurateurs, they all just simply became known as restaurateurs. Now, keep in mind, this still refers to the person and not the establishment. When you went to a restaurateur, you went to the guy. And it wasn't until the beginning of the 20th century that a real restaurant started to take its place and started to be called the place, not the person running the place. So you went to the restaurant, not to go see the restaurateur. And now, of course, we have chefs that have been released to the general public, and they start to change the way that the food is presented. And remember, most of these guys that have been released from the castle, so to speak, they really only know elaborate 20-course banquets. They've been working for lords, for royals. They've been working for the rich for a really long time. A 20-course banquet probably is not a good business idea when it goes to feeding average people. So these royal chefs, they needed to adapt, and so many of them did, but many of them did not. And those that did change their ways also changed culinary history forever. And these are the forefathers of modern cuisine that I wanted to introduce you to today and give you all that back story, all that back information. So let's talk about the forefathers of cuisine and try and figure out which one of them you are. The first is Antoine Carême. Now, some people say Carême. I don't know that there's anyone around that could tell you exactly how to pronounce his name. Since there's a little accent usually there, I'm going to say Carême. And Carême was the father of grande or haute cuisine. Interesting story, he was abandoned by his parents at the age of 10 at the height of the French Revolution. Can you imagine abandoning your kid during the Revolution? But he got a job as a kitchen boy at this cheap Parisian chop house at the age of 10 in exchange for room and board. But he quickly became noticed in culinary circles. And at 28, he was cooking with or for the most famous chefs, the biggest diplomats, including Napoleon of the time. Carême, he brought commercial food service mostly to the wealthy. All right, he's known as not being able to let go of those elaborate things, and using his knowledge of these lavish royal buffets, he developed very rich, very intricate, very elaborate meals consisting of dozens of courses. Now, he really wasn't keeping up with the changing times when it came to what was being cooked, but he did have a huge impact on the kitchen itself. And he was the guy to first dismiss this whole idea of the guild system, assigning each person to what was being cooked. This one guy had to cook all the meats, and so on. In the kitchen, he emphasized procedure over where the specific duties were performed by assigning them to stations rather than to the person. And this is the beginning of the classical brigade system that we talked about a few weeks ago. He's credited with inventing the standard chef's hat, the chef's toque, as well as the chef's double-breasted coat and the long sleeves that are a protection against spills and burns. He changed meal service from placing all the courses on the table at once to serving the courses one at a time. Think about this, a dramatic difference. It used to be that all the food was laid on the table. Now you have people bringing it to you one at a time. This is crazy at the time. This is revolutionary. He was the first to create a long list of sauces and have them come from other sauces. This is the start of the mother sauces tree that we talk about today, but his had hundreds of them on them. The next founding father of cuisine is Auguste Escoffier. There he is Auguste Escoffier. He's considered the father of classic cuisine. And as the quote that goes with Escoffier, and he's probably the most quoted chef of any until Anthony Bourdain, I guess. But Escoffier was the king of chefs and the chef of kings. Although you can find that quote attributed to Carême as well, depending on who you read. Again, make it up and write it down, it becomes history. So whoever writes it down first. But look, unlike Carême, Escoffier, he never worked in an aristocratic kitchen. He never worked for a lord or anything like that. He started working in his uncle's working class restaurant at the age of 13, and he eventually rose up to work in some of the finest hotels in all of Europe. But now, Escoffier's thing is that he can be identified with simplification, with simplifying these overly elaborate, these fussy procedures and classifications of Carême's haute cuisine. Escoffier thought that Carême's ideas were just total chaos, and he reduced Carême's elaborate system of classifying sauces into just 5 mother sauces. These are the ones that we still study today. And Escoffier, he sought simplicity and balance. That's his quote. Simplicity and balance from a few superb ingredients rather than a whole complicated mass of variety. This is my school of thought when it comes to cooking. And Escoffier is known for organized discipline, and he's the guy known for moving the word restaurateur to the word chef, and is seen as having professionalized, adding a profession, a set of organized principles to our profession. And then we come to more modern days, kind of. It's Ferdinand Point. Now, he is the father of Nouvelle cuisine. He's considered the father of modern French cuisine, and he refined and modernized the classic cuisine of Escoffier. Well, Escoffier thought Caramel was crazy, insane, way too complicated and ornate. Point said pretty much the same thing about Escoffier. Oh, it's stuffy, it's way too ornate and elaborate. And remember, we started 25 minutes ago with guilds and castles. I mean, these guys have a lot of difficulty keeping things simple. Point hated these dominating heavy sauces. He hated distracting garnishes, birds' heads coming out of pies and things. He believed that each dish should have a single dominant ingredient, flavor, or theme. I agree with that as well. Let it speak to the person eating it. Garnishment, it's got to be simple. He said the garnishment on a meal should match the meal like a tie to a suit. Simple and elegant, and he helped usher in a whole trend of lighter, naturally flavored, more simply prepared foods. His procedure is a lot more direct, a lot more simple, using the highest quality ingredients he could over the most complicated procedure to make a lesser ingredient taste great. And this is basically where we are today. And I mean, I could go on and on. I could continue with a long list of contemporary chefs who are constantly moving cuisine forward because it never stops. With all the changes that James Beard, Julia Child, Alice Waters, Charlie Trotter, Roy Yamaguchi, even Justin Wilson. Yes, I'll take that suggestion. All these people they've brought all new ideas since Caramel's time, but all of them together can't match such an incredibly turbulent and violent beginning of selling food to the public at a table from a list brought by other people. So, it took a long time to get here. I'm not just talking about this show. I got to ask you this question then. Which chef are you? If you're Caramel, you love cooking the big family meal. You love the huge banquet, right? If you want to be the chef at Downton Abbey, then you're on Team Caramel. But if you think that's just a bit too much, if you think it's too elaborate, if you think it's too much work, it's too complicated, then you might be Escoffier. Look, Escoffier don't play. Escoffier don't play at all. Do others say that you're tough in the kitchen? Do you chase others out of the kitchen? Do you have to do it your way? Well, then you're Team Escoffier for sure. Or hey, maybe you think, it's all good, man. It's light, it's cool, it's casual, it's uncomplicated, right? We're all good. We're all still learning. We're all taking our own journeys. Sound familiar? We all move together on our culinary journey by taking another step. If this is you, then you're Nouvelle and your Team Point. So which are you? Tell me in the comments below. Who do you identify with? Now that you know what each one of these men contributed to the history of cuisine, name the founding father that you identify with the most. And now that you understand why I really bring it when I'm teaching this class to tomorrow's chefs, because it is so important to know what your philosophy is in cooking. And if you don't know where you've been, you can never figure out where you're gonna go. That's the problem with not knowing where you've come from. Oh, so let's see who's cooking like a founding father of cuisine this week in our Carefree Cooks community. First is Judith. Judith created a French onion stuffed pork loin with garlic, Parmesan, Brussels sprouts, and bacon, and roasted garlic parmesan mashed potatoes. Man, that's some founding forefather stuff. That's pretty elaborate. I'm thinking Caramay would be proud of that one. That's a Caramay. All right, Walter also played with some pork loin this week, and just to show you how a different interpretation on the same ingredient happens between two cooks, he says that it's his pork tenderloin Cumberland with rosemary potatoes and a mustard onion thing. He called it thing, mustard onion thing. So if you throw the word thing in there, it's a little less complicated. It's a little casual. It's a little more simplicity applied to the pork loin. I think it's an Escoffier. I think Escoffier would approve. Oh, and I am so proud of Paula this week. Let me tell you about Paula. She just joined our Carefree Cooks community. She just got her lifetime membership in web cooking classes, and she got right involved, jumped right into our community, immediately put the methods to use with this dish. She says it's a little more like a tuna helper, okay, but she created it entirely on her own. No recipes, no fake ingredients, nothing. She even made her own vegetable broth to bring even more flavor to the dish. Nicely done. You are on your way. That's great. Carla, is cooking bone marrow. Grilling bone marrow. I mean, that's hot cuisine for sure, right? I know Antoine, he would be very happy with that. And what else? Oh, Frank made lobster thermidor in the shell this week for dinner. Nice, Frank. He said it took an hour to prepare, but it was worth every minute. It's usually an hour to prepare and 5 minutes to eat. Right, Frank? Isn't that the way it goes? You know, and lobster thermidor, if we're assigning it to founding father chefs, it's definitely an Escoffier, because the original creator of lobster thermidor was a chef named Leopold Morier, and he was actually an assistant to Escoffier in 1891. And lobster thermidor, this is one of those quintessential Belle Epoque dishes that you would see in Paris if you were dining in the 1890s. You'd be sitting at a cafe, you know, debating about poetry, smoking your cigarette like this, you know. You'd be talking about writers and painters of the day. So I've got a bit of bonus culinary history for you here, because Chef Morier's restaurant, Les Maisons Meyer, or the Mayor's House, was near the theater. The theater was called de la Porte Saint-Martin. It's still there, this theater. There it is. Here it is back then. In January of 1891, the theater was presenting a play named Thermidor by Victorien Sardou. And it was opening at that theater near Morier, the chef's restaurant. You with me? The play took the name Thermidor from a summer month on the French Republican calendar named the Thermidorian Reaction. Okay, so this is heresy, all right? You know, this is treason to have this calendar and to name your play it, because it was about the overthrow of Robespierre, and it was the end of the reign of terror in France. Okay, I know, this is getting like a whole web. It's getting crazy. So, Morier, the chef, has the restaurant across the street from the theater that is playing the play named Thermidor that is outrageous, okay? Very political, very controversial. It closed after one performance. Authorities closed it down in 1891. So what's this got to do with lobster thermidor? The lobster thermidor recipe in 1891 was named for the scandalous play at the theater across the street because they wanted some notoriety. The word thermidor became scandalous, so they named it lobster thermidor. It's a marketing gimmick, and they sold it like crazy. It became a classic dish because of a scandalous play that was playing at a theater down the street. Crazy, huh? History of lobster thermidor. You know, there's a story behind just about every classic dish that includes politics, culture, nature. I mean, it's just fascinating to me. It gives me an even greater appreciation for where my food comes from and where my cooking comes from. So, oh, hey, next week we are going to start the most important 6 weeks of the year for Carefree Cooks. Make sure you're with us. Don't miss next week's Carefree Cooks Code, because we're going to start to talk about holiday cooking plans so we can all have the best holiday season ever in 2019. I'm going to help you a lot this year. We're going to be talking a lot. Let's get back to the what am I for this week. You want to know the answer to the what am I? These things, this is a bone holder. So when you roasted a leg of lamb, if you roasted some kind of leg of pork, something like that, this is a very ornate to hold the shank bone, the leg bone of the animal, and carve it on the table. Like I said, you'd see that at Downton Abbey or something like that. It's a bone holder. And if you know someone who needs a bone holder, no, if you know someone who would identify with one of our founding father chefs, if you saw someone in there, please share this video with them and like it so everyone knows that this is good stuff. This was good stuff today, no? This was good stuff. And if you'd like to start your own culinary journey and be able to cook any ingredient for any diet or any desire in any style, like a restaurateur or a traiteur, well, get my free guidebook, The 5 Forks to Carefree Cooking. I'm going to show you the way. Go to 5forksguide.com to download your free copy now. So until next Tuesday, when we start working on breaking that Carefree Cooks Code again, this is Chef Tardmore reminding you that there's a method to your historical cooking success. See you next Tuesday. Bye, everyone.